I last week stood in the chilled aisle of my local Tesco in South Kensington, holding a packet of cake decorations in my hand, when something caught my eye. There, nestled among the ingredients list, was a designation that made me pause: E171, titanium dioxide. The very same compound that has been completely banned across the European Union since August 2022, yet here it was, perfectly legal, sitting on a British supermarket shelf ready for families to purchase and consume. After 2 decades researching public health and nutrition science at Imperial College London, I have learned that the most important discoveries often happen not in the laboratory, but in the ordinary moments when we pay attention to what we are actually putting into our bodies. This was one of those moments, and it prompted me to investigate a question that should concern every British family: why has Europe taken decisive action to protect its citizens from this ingredient whilst the UK continues to allow it in our food supply? The story of titanium dioxide is not simply about one food additive. It represents something far more significant about the state of food safety regulation in post-Brexit Britain, about the trust we place in our major supermarket chains, and about the responsibility we bear as consumers to understand what we are feeding ourselves and our children. For generations, British shoppers have operated on an implicit assumption that if a product sits on the shelf of a trusted retailer like Tesco, Sainsbury's, or ASDA, it must be safe. We have built our food culture on the principle that rigorous standards protect us, that transparent labeling informs us, and that corporations and regulators work together in the public interest. But the continued presence of E171 in British food products raises uncomfortable questions about whether that trust is still warranted, and whether the regulatory divergence that has followed our departure from the European Union is truly serving the interests of British consumers. Titanium dioxide is a white pigment, the same substance used to give brilliant opacity to paint, sunscreen, and toothpaste. In the food industry, it serves a purely cosmetic function, making products appear brighter, whiter, and more visually appealing. You will find it in cake icings and decorations, in certain white sweets and confectionery, in some chewing gums, and occasionally in sauces and processed foods where manufacturers want to achieve that perfect, pristine white appearance. It has no nutritional value whatsoever. It does not preserve food, enhance flavor, or improve texture in any meaningful way. Its sole purpose is aesthetic, to make food look more attractive on the shelf. This is an important point to understand from the outset, because when we discuss the risks associated with this ingredient, we are not talking about a necessary component of food production that would be difficult to replace. We are talking about a purely cosmetic additive that European manufacturers have already successfully eliminated from their products with minimal disruption. The European Food Safety Authority, known as EFSA, is one of the most respected scientific bodies in the world when it comes to food safety assessment. In May 2021, after reviewing approximately 10,000 scientific studies, EFSA reached a stark conclusion: titanium dioxide could no longer be considered safe as a food additive. The concern centered on genotoxicity, which refers to damage to genetic material within our cells. When substances cause genotoxic effects, they have the potential to damage DNA, and such damage can accumulate over time, potentially leading to serious health consequences, including cancer. The EFSA panel could not rule out that titanium dioxide particles, particularly the nano-sized particles present in food-grade E171, might cause this type of damage. Under the precautionary principle that guides European food law, when you cannot definitively prove that something is safe, particularly when genotoxicity is a concern, you do not allow it in the food supply. This is not about proven harm beyond all doubt. This is about recognizing that when the scientific evidence raises red flags about potential DNA damage, the responsible course of action is to remove that substance from foods that millions of people, including children, consume regularly. The European Union acted on this scientific advice with remarkable speed. By January 2022, the European Commission had adopted Regulation 2022/63, formally withdrawing the authorization to use titanium dioxide as a food additive. The regulation gave manufacturers and retailers until August 7, 2022 to reformulate their products and clear existing stock from shelves. After that date, any food product containing E171 could no longer be legally placed on the European market. This was not a decision taken lightly, nor was it driven by political considerations or public pressure. It was a regulatory response grounded in scientific evidence and in the fundamental principle that has long guided European food policy: when in doubt, protect public health first and ask questions about economic convenience second. The contrast with the British response could not be more striking. Here in the UK, the Committee on Toxicity of Chemicals in Food, Consumer Products and the Environment, which advises our Food Standards Agency, reviewed the same scientific evidence and reached a different conclusion. In December 2024, the COT stated that it was unlikely there would be a risk to health from current UK dietary exposures of E171 titanium dioxide. The committee acknowledged the uncertainties and data gaps, recognized that titanium dioxide particles can cross the gut barrier and accumulate in body tissues, but ultimately decided that the levels of exposure in the British diet fell below what they considered to be a threshold of concern. They set this threshold at 10 milligrams per kilogram of body weight daily, a figure that sounds reassuringly scientific but rests on assumptions that many toxicologists would question, particularly when dealing with potential genotoxic substances where there may be no truly safe level of exposure. This divergence in regulatory approach reflects a fundamental philosophical difference. The European Union applies what is known as the precautionary principle with considerable rigor. If credible scientific evidence suggests a potential risk, even if that risk cannot be precisely quantified, the burden of proof falls on those who wish to continue using the substance to demonstrate beyond reasonable doubt that it is safe. The UK system, by contrast, tends to work with the concept of acceptable daily intake and risk thresholds. If calculated exposures fall below a certain level, the substance is considered acceptable for use. Both approaches have their defenders, but when the substance in question serves no nutritional purpose whatsoever and when the European experience has demonstrated that manufacturers can easily reformulate without it, one has to question why British regulators are choosing the less cautious path. What makes this situation particularly troubling is that we are not talking about small, artisanal producers who might struggle to reformulate. We are talking about major multinational corporations and leading British supermarket chains with vast resources and technical expertise. Tesco, as Britain's largest supermarket chain with over 27% market share, sets standards that ripple through the entire food industry. When Tesco stocks products containing E171, it sends a message to suppliers, to competitors, and to consumers about what is acceptable. Yet Tesco operates across Europe, and the products it sells in its stores in Poland, in the Czech Republic, and in Hungary have been reformulated to remove titanium dioxide. The same brands, often made by the same manufacturers, simply use different formulations depending on which side of the channel they are being sold. Funcakes, a popular brand of cake decorating products, offers a telling example. Their standard white decorating melts contain E171 and are sold in British stores. But they also produce a natural white version explicitly labelled as containing no E171, demonstrating that the technology and ingredients exist to create perfectly functional white products without resorting to titanium dioxide. The presence of E171 in British products is not about technical necessity. It is about regulatory arbitrage and commercial calculation. Manufacturers know they can continue using a cheaper ingredient in the UK market because British regulations permit it, even whilst they have been forced to find alternatives for their European customers. This creates a two-tier system where British consumers are effectively being offered a lower standard of food safety than our European neighbours, not because of any difference in vulnerability or need, but simply because our regulators have chosen a different interpretation of the scientific evidence. For families trying to make informed choices about what to feed their children, for elderly people who may be more vulnerable to cumulative exposures, for anyone who simply expects that British food standards should be world-leading, this is deeply concerning. The economic arguments for maintaining authorization of E171 are remarkably weak. When France moved to ban titanium dioxide in food ahead of the EU-wide ban, industry representatives warned of significant costs and disruptions. Those warnings proved largely unfounded. Manufacturers adapted, often discovering that alternative ingredients performed just as well or better. The natural white appearance achieved without E171 may be slightly less brilliant, but consumers quickly adapted to products that looked marginally less artificial. More importantly, the ban created a level playing field where all companies had to meet the same standard, eliminating any competitive disadvantage for those who chose to reformulate voluntarily. The British food industry has successfully navigated far more complex regulatory changes, from the reduction of salt and sugar content to the introduction of traffic light labelling. The notion that removing one purely cosmetic ingredient would create insurmountable challenges simply does not withstand scrutiny. What we are witnessing is a case study in how post-Brexit regulatory divergence actually functions in practice, and it should give us pause. Before Brexit, British consumers benefited from being part of the largest and most stringent food safety regime in the world. European regulations were often criticised for being overly cautious, for prioritising the precautionary principle to what some saw as an excessive degree. But that caution meant that when scientific concerns emerged about a substance like titanium dioxide, the system was structured to err on the side of protecting public health. Now, with regulatory autonomy, the UK has the freedom to chart its own course. In theory, this could mean maintaining high standards whilst adding British flexibility and pragmatism. In practice, at least in this case, it has meant allowing an ingredient that Europe has deemed too risky, creating a situation where British families are consuming substances that would be illegal to sell just across the channel. The broader implications extend beyond titanium dioxide itself. If British regulators are willing to diverge from European standards on this issue, where else might they choose different thresholds, different interpretations, different balances between economic considerations and public health? The question is not whether the UK should blindly follow every European decision, but whether we have the robust, well-resourced, scientifically independent regulatory infrastructure to make consistently sound judgments in the public interest. The Food Standards Agency has faced significant resource constraints in recent years. Its budget has not kept pace with the expanding responsibilities that come with regulatory independence. The European Food Safety Authority can draw on scientific expertise from across 27 member states, giving it unparalleled depth and breadth. The FSA, for all the dedication of its staff, simply cannot match that scale of scientific assessment. When I see 171 still permitted in British foods despite European concerns, I cannot help but wonder whether our regulatory system is making evidence-based decisions or whether it is, perhaps unconsciously, influenced by a desire to minimize disruption and avoid conflict with industry. Trust is a fragile thing. British consumers have historically placed enormous trust in supermarket chains like Tesco, Sainsbury's, ASDA, and Morrisons. These are not just shops. They are institutions woven into the fabric of British life. Most families do their weekly shop at one of these retailers, trusting that the products on offer meet high standards of safety and quality. That trust is built on decades of experience, on the assumption that these companies take their responsibilities seriously, and on the regulatory framework that is supposed to hold them accountable. When a major retailer continues to stock products containing an ingredient that Europe has banned on safety grounds, that trust is tested. The defense that E171 remains legal in the UK is technically accurate but morally insufficient. Legal compliance is a minimum standard, not an aspiration. Companies with the resources and reach of Tesco have the capacity to set higher standards, to choose suppliers who have already reformulated, to exercise the kind of corporate responsibility that goes beyond mere legal obligation. The question that every concerned British consumer should be asking is remarkably straightforward. What can we actually do about this? Understanding the problem is important, but knowledge without action serves little purpose when it comes to protecting our family's health. The good news, and there is genuinely good news here, is that we have considerably more power than most people realize. The choices we make in supermarket aisles, the questions we ask of retailers, and the standards we demand as consumers have profound effects on what the food industry produces and what regulators permit. The first step in exercising that power is learning to read food labels with the kind of informed scrutiny that transforms shopping from a passive routine into an active form of health protection. Food labeling in the United Kingdom follows regulations inherited from our time in the European Union, and whilst these regulations have their limitations, they do require manufacturers to list all ingredients in descending order by weight. Additives must be identified either by their name or by their EN number, preceded by their functional category. This means titanium dioxide will appear either as E171 or as colour titanium dioxide on ingredients lists. The E-number system, despite standing for Europe, remains in use across British labelling because it provides a standardised, language-independent way to identify additives. When you see E171, you are looking at titanium dioxide. When you see numbers in the E100 to E180 range, you are looking at colours. The E200 to E285 range indicates preservatives, whilst E300 to E392 covers antioxidants. Learning these ranges takes no more effort than memorizing a phone number, yet it equips you with the ability to instantly identify the functional categories of additives as you scan ingredient lists during your weekly shop. The challenge with E171 specifically is that it tends to appear in products where you might not expect to find it. Cake decorations are perhaps the most obvious application. The bright white icing, the pristine white chocolate buttons used for decorating, the pearl-like sugar decorations that make celebration cakes look spectacular all frequently contain titanium dioxide. Brands like Fun Cakes, which are widely available in Tesco, ASDA, and independent baking supply shops across Britain, offer standard product lines containing E171 alongside alternative versions explicitly labelled as titanium dioxide free. The natural white versions exist and function perfectly well, but they sit alongside the E171 containing versions on the same shelves, leaving consumers to make the choice if they know to look for it. Confectionery presents another area of concern. Certain white sweets, particularly those aiming for that brilliant, opaque white appearance, may contain E171. The challenge is that product formulations change, and what was titanium dioxide free last year may contain it this year if a manufacturer decides to adjust their recipe or their supplier. This brings us to a critical point about how to approach food shopping in an environment where regulatory standards may not fully protect us. The most reliable strategy is not to memorize every product that does or does not contain E171 because formulations change and that information quickly becomes outdated. Instead, the reliable approach is to cultivate the habit of reading ingredients lists every single time you purchase a processed food product, even if you have bought that product dozens of times before. This sounds tedious, and in an ideal world it should not be necessary, but we do not live in an ideal world. We live in a food environment where the same product can have different formulations in different countries, where manufacturers reformulate regularly, and where a product that was safe to consume last month may contain new ingredients this month. The few seconds it takes to scan an ingredients list is a small investment for the assurance it provides. Supermarket choice matters enormously in this context. Whilst all major British retailers stock some products containing E171, there are significant differences in corporate approach and in the standards that different chains apply to their own brand products. Waitrose, which positions itself at the premium end of the British grocery market, has historically taken a more cautious approach to controversial additives in its own label products. The company's commitment to higher welfare standards, which earned it recognition from Compassion in World Farming as the best retailer in Europe for animal welfare, extends to a more general ethos of prioritizing quality and safety over cost minimization. Waitrose stated explicitly, in the context of post-Brexit trade discussions, that it would never sell under its own label any product that does not meet its high standards regardless of what regulations might permit. This corporate positioning translates into practical differences on the shelf. Whilst Waitrose stores may stock third-party brands containing E171, the Waitrose-owned brand products, particularly in categories like baking ingredients and confectionery, tend to avoid controversial additives. Marks & Spencer occupies a similar position in the market, with a reputation built on quality and a customer base that expects premium standards. The M&S food range, particularly their premium lines, generally reflects a more cautious approach to additives. The company's trailblazing work on animal welfare standards, becoming the first major UK supermarket to fulfill the Better Chicken commitment criteria across its entire chicken offering, including ready meals and sandwiches, demonstrates a willingness to go beyond minimum regulatory requirements when the company believes it serves customer interests and aligns with their brand values. This does not mean that every M&S product is free from E171, particularly when it comes to branded products sold in M&S stores, but it does mean that their own brand ranges tend to reflect more conservative additive policies. The contrast with discount retailers is instructive. Aldi and Lidl have transformed the British grocery market over the past decade, proving that high quality and low prices are not mutually exclusive. Both chains have won awards for product quality, and both have made significant commitments to animal welfare and environmental standards. However, their business model depends on extreme efficiency and on sourcing products at the lowest possible cost whilst maintaining acceptable quality. This can sometimes mean that their additive policies are more aligned with what regulations permit rather than with what the most cautious scientific assessment might recommend. This is not a criticism of these retailers per se, but rather an observation that different business models create different incentives. A customer shopping at Aldi or Lidl who wishes to avoid E171 will need to be particularly vigilant about reading labels, because the corporate positioning of these retailers does not emphasize the avoidance of controversial additives in the way that Waitrose or M&S might. Tesco, Sainsbury's ASDA and Morrisons occupy the middle ground in British grocery retail, and their approach to additives reflects that positioning. These are not premium retailers, but neither are they discount chains. They cater to a broad cross-section of British consumers with varying priorities and budgets. Their own brand ranges typically include value lines, standard lines, and premium lines, and the additive policies vary across these tiers. The premium own brand lines, such as Tesco Finest or Sainsbury's Taste the Difference, tend to have cleaner ingredient lists and are more likely to avoid controversial additives. The value lines are more focused on price competitiveness, and whilst they must meet regulatory requirements, they are less likely to go beyond those requirements voluntarily. For consumers shopping at these mainstream retailers, the practical approach is to favour the premium owned brand lines when purchasing categories of food where E171 might be present, and to rigorously check labels on value line products. The rise of organic and natural food brands provides another avenue for consumers seeking to avoid titanium dioxide and other controversial additives. Organic certification standards in the UK, which largely mirror European organic regulations, severely restrict the use of additives. E171 is not permitted in products certified as organic, which means that choosing organic baking products, organic sweets when available, and organic alternatives in categories where titanium dioxide commonly appears provides a straightforward way to avoid exposure. Brands like Dove's Farm, which specializes in organic flours and baking ingredients, offers products that by definition cannot contain E171. The higher price point of organic products is a genuine barrier for many families, particularly in the current economic climate, but in specific categories where E171 is a concern, the price premium may be justified by the assurance it provides. The broader shift towards free-from and clean label products in the British food market creates opportunities for consumers even outside the organic sector. Clean label is not a legally defined term, but it refers to products that minimize the use of additives and artificial ingredients, favoring simpler, more recognizable ingredient lists. Many manufacturers have recognized that a significant and growing segment of British consumers actively seeks out products with shorter, simpler ingredients lists, and they have reformulated accordingly. When you see products marketed as having no artificial colors or no artificial additives, these products will not contain E171. The challenge is that such marketing claims are voluntary, so the absence of a claim does not necessarily mean the product contains titanium dioxide. This is why the fundamental skill of reading ingredients lists remains essential regardless of marketing messages. Technology can assist in this process. Several mobile applications now exist that allow consumers to scan product barcodes and receive instant information about ingredients, including flagging controversial additives. Applications like Yuka, which originated in France but works with British products, scan barcodes and provide a health rating based on nutritional quality and the presence of concerning additives. These tools are not perfect, and their algorithms reflect particular judgments about what constitutes a concerning ingredient, but they can be valuable aids for consumers who want help identifying problematic products without becoming experts in food science. The limitation is that these databases depend on manufacturers reporting accurate information, and formulations can change faster than databases update. Using such apps as a supplementary tool while still checking actual ingredients lists provides a balanced approach. The question of children's exposure to E171 deserves particular attention. Children consume certain categories of foods, particularly sweets, biscuits, and cake products, at higher rates relative to their body weight than adults do. Their developing systems may be more vulnerable to compounds that can cross biological barriers and accumulate in tissues. European regulators took children's exposure into account when deciding to ban titanium dioxide, recognizing that products heavily consumed by children were among the primary sources of E171 in the diet. British parents concerned about their children's exposure should focus particular attention on the categories of food that children consume most enthusiastically. Birthday cake, decorations, white chocolate treats, certain biscuit brands, and novelty confectionery are all categories where E171 commonly appears and where children's consumption is significant. The good news is that alternatives exist in every one of these categories. Cake decorations using natural colors or no coloring at all are widely available. White chocolate products without titanium dioxide can be found in health food shops and increasingly in mainstream supermarkets. The slightly less brilliant white appearance becomes completely unnoticeable once you adjust to it, and children certainly do not care whether their birthday cake decorations contain E171 as long as the cake tastes good. For families who enjoy home baking, which remains a cherished tradition in British culture, sourcing titanium dioxide-free decorating ingredients has become easier as awareness has grown. Specialist baking shops and online retailers now routinely offer E171-free alternatives, and they explicitly market these products as such because they know there is demand. The Cake Decorating Company, a well-established British retailer, stocks products clearly labelled as containing E171 alongside alternatives, allowing customers to make informed choices. The fact that both versions exist in the market demonstrates that E171 is not a necessary ingredient, even in applications where bright white appearance has traditionally been valued. It is purely a choice made by manufacturers based on cost, convenience, and regulatory permissions rather than technical necessity. The economic dimension of this issue cannot be ignored. For families already struggling with the cost of living crisis that has gripped Britain in recent years, the suggestion to shop more carefully, to favour premium-owned brand lines, or to choose organic alternatives can feel disconnected from reality. Food poverty is a genuine and growing problem in the UK, and it would be both insensitive and impractical to suggest that everyone can simply shop their way out of exposure to controversial additives. However, even within tight budget constraints, there are strategies that can reduce exposure without requiring wholesale changes to shopping patterns. The first is to focus attention on the categories of food where E171 most commonly appears. You do not need to buy organic everything or shop exclusively at Waitrose. What you can do is pay particular attention to cake decorations, white confectionery, and certain processed foods, checking labels carefully in these specific categories, whilst being less concerned about categories where titanium dioxide rarely appears. The second strategy is to reduce overall consumption of highly processed foods where additives congregate. This advice appears constantly in public health guidance, often to the point of becoming white noise, but it remains true that a diet based more heavily on whole foods, on ingredients rather than products, naturally reduces exposure to all additives including E171. Baking a cake from scratch using flour, eggs, butter, and sugar contains no titanium dioxide because none of those ingredients contain it. Using shop-bought cake decorations may introduce it. The time and skill required for home cooking is a genuine barrier, but for families who have those resources, cooking from scratch provides a natural form of additive avoidance.